This video is for anyone who is currently in their New Year's rebrand era. There is one very simple thing that you can do for yourself this year to be healthier, more productive, and even improve your finances, all while making every day of this year feel happier, calmer, and easier. It's not Pilates, it's not any kind of supplement or red light therapy device. You could do all of the wellness trends in the world and it still won't improve your life as much as this one thing. I haven't seen a lot of content talking about this thing on social media, and it's not like it's a super big secret or something that needs to be gate kept or anything. It just seems to be wildly unappreciated. So let's talk about it together today. Emotional regulation. Learning how to regulate your emotions is the ultimate glow up move, and here's why that's true. Picture that person you know, and we all know someone like this, who, when they get worked up, they effectively throw an adult-sized tantrum and they let their emotions run the show. And I'm willing to bet that this is not behavior that you particularly respect or admire. This would be somebody who has poor emotional regulation. It's just not a good look. It's not cute, and we don't want to be like this person. Learning how to regulate your emotions is also one of the most important life skills that you can learn, mainly because not learning emotional regulation is actually really costly. When we're not able to properly emotionally regulate ourselves, we are at risk of damaging our relationships, our career, and even our physical health. On the other side, the benefits of having healthy emotional regulation are pretty much endless. First of all, it's just naturally going to be a lot easier to stay active, eat healthy, stay away from alcohol, and be good with your money and any other New Year's rebrand goals you might have. Having healthy emotional regulation also helps you to get through some of the most challenging days, not only this year, but for the rest of your life. And chances are we're all going to find ourselves in situations where we feel stressed, overwhelmed, and anxious this year. And when we do, we're not going to let our emotions manage us, we're going to manage them. So I wanted to make a video for you to break down exactly how to do that. This is the ultimate guide to healthy emotional regulation, and we're going to be talking about exactly what to do in those moments where we feel triggered and we need a way to calm down and handle the situation in a level-headed and mature way. And I have 4 simple, actionable steps for us today to help us to do just that. Plus, I also have 2 bonus strategies to help us to be a calmer human overall. But first, if you are new to my channel, hi, I'm Audrey. I am a therapist, and on this channel we talk about tools for improving our relationships, work lives, and overall mental health. First, let's define what exactly emotional regulation actually means. Essentially, emotional regulation is the ability to influence and shape the way we feel and express our emotions, especially the difficult ones like anger, overwhelm, hurt, anxiety, boredom. The goal of emotional regulation isn't to get rid of these emotions entirely or to make sure that we never feel them again, because that's not possible. It's to bring down the intensity of these emotions when we do feel them so that we don't react impulsively, and instead we can respond to them in a thoughtful and constructive way. A lot of emotional regulation has to do with managing our reaction to our difficult emotions. Let me explain. If whenever we get anxious, we start to panic that we're getting anxious and we're like,
oh no, I'm getting anxious. What does this mean? Why does this always happen?
Or if whenever we get sad, we get frustrated that we're sad and we're like,
this always happens to me. I always get sad and then I don't want to do anything, and why am I like this?
All this does when we negatively react to our anxiety or sadness is amplify those feelings, and it just makes us feel even worse. So when we're learning emotional regulation, basically what we're doing is we're changing our default reaction to our difficult emotions. And instead of responding in a way that fuels them, we respond in a way that soothes them. Now, I have a feeling some of you are going to be wondering about suppressing your emotions and whether this counts as good emotional regulation. So let's clear this up now. Suppressing your emotions does not count as healthy emotional regulation. In fact, science says that suppressing your emotions is not only damaging to our mental health, but also our physical health. Like, look at this study. It says that suppressing your emotions is even associated with things like cardiovascular disease and even cancer. Like, if that does not convince you to learn healthy emotional regulation, I don't know what will. Whenever we feel an emotion that we don't like and we try to push it down or avoid it or try to distract ourselves from it with social media or whatever our vice might be, yes, this might offer some instant relief, but the long-term negative consequences are clearly pretty damaging. Obviously, I want all of us to be our healthiest, most thriving selves, and I don't want any of these consequences to happen to you, which is why I wanted to make this video to give you the alternative for managing your emotions in a much healthier way. So let's get into that now. The very first step to becoming our most emotionally regulated selves is to self-reflect. Before we can even find ourselves in a triggering situation where we might need to use some emotional regulation, we're gonna do some self-reflection to understand ourselves better and our emotions better. And this is already gonna put us steps ahead when that moment comes. So there are two parts to the reflection that we're gonna do. Part one is to identify your triggers. So I'd like you to ask yourself, what types of situations / people tend to trigger these difficult emotions for me the most? Is it when your partner's actions or inactions cause you to feel rejected? Or is it when you start to get close to somebody and that makes you feel really uncomfortable? Is it when you're at work and you feel like your voice isn't being heard? Or is it when you're in an argument with your parents and they just seem committed to not understanding you? Having this self-awareness of what our triggers are is already going to help us to feel less triggered when we do encounter them. And part two of this self-reflection is to figure out what is your default reaction when you do encounter these triggers. So I'd like you to ask yourself, what do I normally do in response to difficult emotions? Do you tend to have an angry outburst and then say things that you regret later? Which, if you do, there's no shame in that. You are not the only person in the world that has this tendency. You are not special here. Or do you tend to shut down and it's like your mind goes blank and you suddenly go mute? And I also invite you to ask yourself, how do you usually try to cope with difficult emotions? What behaviors do you turn to when you're feeling overwhelmed? And how well do those behaviors actually work, both in the short term and in the long term? And do you want to use these behaviors? Maybe you do shove your emotions down and pretend they don't exist and just move on with your day. Or maybe you do have a tendency to distract yourself with scrolling or online shopping or having a night out. Again, there's no shame in whatever your answer is. The most important thing here is that we're as honest with ourselves as possible because we need to know where we're starting to know where we're going. All right, self-reflection done. We are now ready to get into the 4 steps of healthy emotional regulation. This is exactly what we're gonna do when we feel triggered. So for the sake of this video, let's pretend that we are in a conflict with our partner, since we like to focus on relationships on this channel. You've invited your partner to a dinner with your close friends, and it's important to you that your partner comes to this dinner with you, and they've said that they're not going to go because work has been really busy and they're tired and they don't feel like going. And this upsets you, and you guys argue back and forth a few times, and your partner is just not listening to you. They're not understanding where you're coming from, and you can feel yourself getting to your breaking point. Instead of defaulting to having an emotional outburst or shutting down, this is what we're gonna do instead. Step 1, take a break. Before you say or do anything out of anger, I want you to physically remove yourself from your partner's vicinity. You should not be able to see or hear them. It's going to be very difficult to emotionally regulate yourself if you remain in front of the thing that caused that emotion in the first place. So please excuse yourself and ask for some time. In the situation of being in an argument with your partner, obviously it would be pretty inconsiderate to just suddenly get up and leave the room. So this is where the very wise advice of Doctors John and Julie Gottman is really gonna save us and our relationship. The Gottmans are world-renowned relationship experts, and what they suggest is that before you take your break, to let your partner know what's going on for you and suggest a time to revisit the issue so that you're not just like leaving your partner in the dark. So this might look like saying something along the lines of, I'm really overwhelmed right now and I am not in a mental state where I can have a constructive conversation. I'm going to take some time to myself and let's reconvene in 2 hours and try to resolve this. Steps 2 and 3 are all about what we're going to do in those 2 hours to calm down. So let's get into step 2, calm your nervous system. Being emotionally dysregulated is a nervous system response, not a thinking problem, which is why it's really hard to try to think our way out of feeling dysregulated. It just doesn't work like that. When we are dysregulated, our sympathetic nervous system is activated, which means that we are in fight or flight mode. And when we're in fight or flight, we don't have access to the rational thinking part of our brain. So if we want to regain our ability to think clearly, the very first thing that we should do is calm our nervous system and move out of fight or flight. And the way we do this is through somatic strategies. Somatic just means that these techniques focus on the body instead of the mind. There are two key somatic strategies that are going to help us to feel better immediately. The first one being breathing. I know, before you click off the video, let me just say that I also used to be very skeptical of breathing exercises until I understood the science. So let me share what convinced me and hopefully it'll convince you too. This study revealed that different emotions are associated with different breathing patterns. So when you feel joy, your breathing is slow and regular. But when you feel anxious or angry, your breathing is going to be really shallow and fast. And what this study found was that you can actually influence your emotional state by changing your breathing pattern to match the emotion that you want to feel. And this study shows that slow breathing techniques can improve emotional control and psychological well-being. And this is because slow breathing activates our vagus nerve, which is part of the parasympathetic nervous system, aka our body's built-in calming mechanism. When our parasympathetic nervous system is activated, we shift out of fight or flight mode and we move into rest and digest mode. Our heart rate slows down, our muscles relax, and our ability to think clearly comes back. Aside from the science, the thing that convinced me the most was just trying it for myself and seeing that it really works. Even if I am in shambles, I know that even just taking one slow, deep breath will instantly help me to feel better. And honestly, since I've taught myself to breathe through any difficult emotions, I've become a different person. I also want you to experience how life-changing breathing exercises can be. So to make it easier for you to get started, I've linked some of my favorite breathing exercises in the description for you to check out if you'd like. They're all only 3 minutes, which is really all the time you need to basically fully reset. And the second somatic strategy is moving your body. This is not about fitness or exercise. It's about moving the emotion through our body and releasing that restless energy that feels stuck in our bodies when we're feeling dysregulated. Something I find really works for me is having different go-to forms of movement depending on the emotion I'm feeling. So for example, if I'm feeling anxious, I'm not gonna go for a HIIT workout or a spin class with intense EDM music. That's just gonna make me feel more anxious. However, HIIT and spin are my go-tos for when I'm feeling angry or frustrated. There's nothing more cathartic than getting your heart pumping out of your chest when you're raging. Yoga is my balm for any difficult emotion. Anger, anxiety, sadness, hurt, despair, you name it. And I decided this for myself a few years ago now after a really eye-opening experience. At the time, I was pretty burnt out from my job and I had been in a slump that had been going on for weeks. It was pretty miserable, honestly. And I had also fallen off my yoga routine at the time. And I specifically remember the very first yoga session I did to get back into my routine. It was just a 20-minute video. It wasn't even a full practice at a studio or anything. Immediately after, I felt better than I had felt in months. It was like the clouds parted and I was shocked. I could not believe that something so simple could make such a huge difference. There's just something so healing about syncing your movement to your breath. Walks are another guaranteed way to help me to feel better no matter how I'm feeling. And I also went through a phase where running was my thing. So I really invite you to experiment around with different types of movement depending on how you're feeling and seeing what helps you the most. The reason why breath and movement work so well to calm us down is because they're both forms of mindfulness, which is one of the most well-established emotional regulation strategies. There are a lot of unclear definitions of mindfulness out there that use very vague language like non-judgmental awareness. The easiest way that I found to think about mindfulness is any activity that takes us out of our head and brings us into our body. And while breath and movement are probably two of the most effective ways to do that, it's definitely not just limited to that. There are tons of other ways. It really could be anything that brings you back into the present moment. And it doesn't need to be anything complicated. You don't need to find a patch of grass to touch or go to a sound bath meditation healing class. For me, for example, all I need to do is look at my dog. I don't even need to pet him yet. All I need to do is look in his direction and immediately I start to feel better. When we're able to get out of our heads and be fully present, we can take a bird's eye view on our emotions. So in our case, since we're in a conflict with our partner, this bird's eye view might sound like telling ourselves, I'm noticing that I'm feeling hurt and I feel like my partner doesn't care about me because they don't want to go to this dinner with my friends. This feels very different than being completely absorbed in the hurt and just straight up telling ourselves, my partner doesn't care about me. Creating this bit of distance between us and our emotions really helps to bring down the intensity of the emotions. And we're gonna need that because that's gonna help us to approach our partner in a constructive way later. Now, if you are taking your rebrand seriously, one of the best things that you can do to train your nervous system for calm over the long run and overall just glow up as a person is to build a regular meditation practice where you practice mindfulness even when you're in a good mood. When you practice mindfulness consistently, you will find that in moments where you do get triggered, you won't get as dysregulated to begin with, and you'll be able to self-soothe a lot faster. When I first got into meditation about 6 years ago now, I noticed that whenever I started to get anxious or angry, I would start deep breathing automatically without even needing to think about it. And honestly, this has really come in handy for me over the years, I'm not gonna lie. So if you haven't found a convincing enough reason to get into meditation yet, I hope this is it for you. It really is one of the best things that you can do for your long-term happiness and health. I wanted to add an optional step here for anyone who needs it. Cry if you feel the need to. There is a reason why they call it a good cry. It is well-established science that crying can be very healthy. This study shows that crying helps to bring our body back into physiological balance, and this study shows that crying releases oxytocin and endorphins, which are feel-good chemicals that actually help to relieve pain. Also, crying is another way to activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which we've talked about is our main goal right now. Of course, there are some important caveats here. Like, first of all, if you find that you are crying all the time and you're crying at things that you normally wouldn't cry at, then that might be a bigger sign to seek support from a mental health professional. Also, we're obviously going to be mindful of our social environment. And if you do find yourself in a setting where crying openly would obviously be socially not a great idea, I really hope that you can step away and find a private space to let it out, because trying to hold in tears in front of other people is just not fun. Overall, I really encourage you to allow yourself to cry if you feel the need to. You're probably going to feel a lot better afterwards, and you're also probably going to be able to handle the situation a lot better than if you had forced yourself to hold it in. Step 3, cognitive reappraisal. This is another one of the most well-established emotional regulation strategies, and it's way less complicated than it sounds. Cognitive reappraisal is just a fancier way of saying reframing. So finding a different perspective to look at our situation that gives it a different meaning and softens its emotional impact. Reframing does take a bit of brain power, so it's a good thing we calmed our nervous system and regained our ability to think first. If we had tried to reframe the situation immediately after it happened, we wouldn't have gotten very far. What a reframe looks like is going to be different depending on the situation and what emotion we're feeling. So in our case, since we're in a conflict with our partner, a reframe might look like questioning ourselves and being like, do I genuinely believe deep down to my core that my partner does not care about me? If it's a healthy, stable relationship, then the answer should obviously be no, of course my partner cares about me. On the other hand, if it's not a stable relationship and we're doubting whether our partner truly cares, then a reframe might look like, all I can do is show up as my best self, and if it still doesn't work out, then this relationship was still really valuable practice for when the right relationship does come around. There is always another way to look at our situation that makes us feel more empowered. So I really invite you to zoom out and explore what that perspective might be for you. And sometimes we might need to enlist the help of a trusted loved one or maybe even a therapist to point out a perspective that we haven't been able to see ourselves yet. You'll know you've landed on the right reframe when it feels like you've had a brain update and you suddenly switch from feeling distressed about your situation to having clarity and a sense of peace about it. I recently made a video where I shared some reframes for a number of different emotions, so if you are looking for some ideas for reframes, then I will leave that video linked over here for you to check out. And step 4, practice self-compassion. Talk to yourself the way you would talk to a friend might work great for you as a reminder to be kinder to yourself, and if so, then amazing. I love that for you. But if that's too cliche for you and it doesn't resonate, then perhaps the reverse will. You could also talk to yourself the way a caring friend would talk to you. Picture that person in your life who you know without a shadow of a doubt that they have your best interests at heart. They're supportive, caring, understanding, and they will call you out on your bullshit when needed. Maybe it's a best friend or a family member or even a therapist. What would this person say to you right now? I would imagine they'd validate your feelings and be like, yeah, that makes sense that you're hurt. It is disappointing that your partner didn't see as much value in this friend dinner as you had hoped. They'd probably encourage you and reassure you that you've got this and be like, I know that you will be able to handle yourself when you do talk to your partner about this. And they'd also probably just remind you that they're here for you and they got you. Imagining what this caring person would say to you in this situation makes it so much easier to talk to ourselves with the same level of care and concern, and it can feel almost as comforting as if the words were coming from someone else. Now that we've gone through the 4 steps of emotional regulation, you should feel like a new human. You should feel calm and level-headed, and you're ready to come back from your break and handle your tough situation in a way that you feel proud of. Now, before you go, I did mention that I have 2 bonus emotional regulation strategies, and personally these are my favorites, so I hope that you will stick around for this part of the video. The first bonus strategy is to get the basics right. If you are not sleeping well or eating well, or you're sitting at your desk all day, or you're not moving your body and you're not leaving your apartment and going outside and getting some fresh air, how are you going to expect to regulate your emotions? No wonder you are feeling on edge all the time and you're losing it at things that normally wouldn't bother you. Getting enough sleep, eating well, and moving our bodies aren't just the basics of physical health, they're also the basics of being a calm and happy human. And the second bonus strategy, and my favorite of them all, eliminate the trigger. If you find that a person or a situation consistently leaves you feeling worse instead of better, then I really urge you to explore, are there any reasonable ways that you can eliminate this trigger from your life, or at least minimize your exposure to it? When it comes to certain relationships or work situations, we don't need to keep subjecting ourselves to environments that persistently make us feel unhappy. Like any skill, emotional regulation takes practice. We are doing some serious glow up work here, so please be patient with yourself in the process. yes. I really hope that these steps help you to get through any tough moments that might come up this year and all the years to come, and I hope they help to make your life a bit calmer and happier. If you are determined to not let any past emotional baggage get in the way of you becoming your best self this year, then I recommend checking out this video next. But in any case, as always, I hope you are doing well. I appreciate you, and I will see you next time. Bye.